That was really, really inspiring. And as he was talking about comparisons, I was like, why can't I have an accent like that? And then I realized I was being convicted. So, in November last year, I was actually, oh yeah, that's the title of my slides. So in November last year, I was actually trying to figure out, let me just play around and with this generative AI thing and see what I can do building an app. And I went to ChatGPT, gave it a blank slate, and came up with some ideas. And then I wanted to see what it would look like to actually build something with AI at the helm. And as I did that, like I said, I had a really fun time doing that. I ended up not going with any of the ideas because I found an app that had been advertised on the FaithTech's Slack channel called Malachi Daily, which I'd had a really good time using. And I wanted to see what can I do building a Swift or an iOS app with that. So with that in mind, I started and I got going. And I also decided, okay, I'm just going to maybe do a series of blog posts. ChatGPT was able to help me out with things like logos, even actually giving me Bible verses. It cut down a lot of time. I started my series of blog posts, but I've only done one, so don't judge me. But why am I telling you this story? Because a couple of weeks ago, in late March, Yvonne, she gave a talk at a FaithTech online event in which she said a phrase that stuck with me, and it was called faith-driven development. And I realized that what I had been doing before was I was actually been practicing what I would say is AI-driven development. And why this stuck with me is that I was thinking about there's all these different types of development. Like if you are into software, you may have heard of things like test-driven development. And with test-driven development, it's a way of writing code where eventually you probably end up with less bloated, more focused, and better documented code. And there's all these other different types of development that can come up as well. And for example, James Fulton, in his talk, when he was talking about ethical AI, at some point he dropped the phrase shareholder-driven development. And when I think about faith-driven development, it's a concept that has been sort of new to me, and I've been learning a lot as part of FaithTech, either being in a community, and FaithTech is a global tech community for Christ, a group of volunteers who come together to steward their God-given gifts in kingdom building work, and I've had an opportunity to practice that as well, in that also as being part of FaithTech's staff, which is also giving me an opportunity in how they do a lot of different things in what is called faith-driven development. And quickly, just a quick background about myself. I am at FaithTech. I am a Global Labs director, and some of the things that I've been doing there include focusing on frontier technology, of which AI is one of them, and it really fascinates me. And as discussions are continuing to grow at this conference and around the world around AI and all of the potential as well as the challenges, I want to kind of like propose what is a better way of building AI. And it could come down to what we have been talking around. And I'm going to be doing this by exploring the FaithTech Playbook and how the redemptive framework that it lays out, which is rooted in what is faith-driven development, can reimagine the world that we build with AI. So at Missional AI 2023 last year, Kevin unveiled what was going to be a published FaithTech Playbook, and you may have all gotten it if you got in your swag bag. For those who are on live stream, you will probably be able to download the book from the QR code. And as the talk, when we talk about the FaithTech Playbook, the overall vision is that there is a uniquely Jesus-centered way of building technology that has a way of not only just redemptively changing the world and the products, but also transforming the folks who build with it. And again, this redemptive technology approach is rooted in our faith and in focusing on Jesus. I want to step back a little bit and unpack what led to this playbook. And when you're thinking about this, when you see some of what goes on in the tech ecosystem and is very much sometimes magnified in the AI world, is that there is this idea that AI can solve everything. Every problem, up to and including ushering in this mind meld of machines and humans, and potentially cheating death. A spoiler alert, Jesus already did that. So this killer app trap AI thing is alive and well, and the playbook highlights some of the challenges around that. But the other thing that the playbook also thinks about is the fact that there is within the community of tech this gap or this distinction or this disconnect between our faith and so our workplace. For example, when you go to work, the people at work may not understand your faith, and sometimes when you go to church, or the community might not understand you. And I'm reminded when Gregory gave his talk yesterday, he talked about coming to the Missional AI conference. It's like, oh my God, these people, they get me. And so sometimes people, when they come to these FaithTech communities, they're like, oh, these people, they actually get me. But sometimes when you are in a workplace or in the tech ecosystem as a faith person, you may think that, oh, if I want to do something missional, I have to probably leave my job. There's this concept of that you cannot influence your work by your faith. But what if we could help Christians in the tech space build in a way that rejects these societal norms and encouraging of bringing their own true self and their unique giftings even in the way they're built? So this is the way, this is the redemptive way, this is a Jesus-centered approach that I will unpack. And I start by going back, and generally in the world, there are sort of three different ways of the way people build technology. And the first is what we can think of as reckless. And reckless is a way that you're building fast, you're moving fast, maybe shareholder-driven development, or maybe you're just so excited about building things that you don't think things through. As an example, after ChatGPT came out, and I was like thinking about this, and I sent a very excited message to my family. I was like, I got this really great idea. I just finished binge watching Netflix show. What if I could just create this generative AI and it could just create movies for me that I could watch endlessly, and I would just be like, I could tell you which characters I want. And then some really wise person in the FaithTech community pitched like, that's not a good idea. So not only will you just get this dopamine hit and you just be like stuck in the screen, everybody else will probably be doing the same thing. It's like TikTok on steroids, and this is just something that is not going to be eventually good for humanity. I really love that aspect of accountability that I got there. That's just like a fun example of something that was just a thought experiment. But sometimes with AI and technology, things can go really wrong where physical harm can actually take place. As an example with GM, they had to recall their driverless cars because something happened. A pedestrian got stuck under the car, and it didn't actually react in a way that would have been potentially the right way to react if a human had been involved. You also got examples of sometimes what might take place with chatbots and OpenAI and all of these different things. A lot of work happened in the background in terms of labeling the data so that what you see when you actually type in a query is not going to be the result of a lot of what happens in the internet, because it's trained on a lot of bad data. So there's actually data labelers who go in and clean the data, and those folks have to look at a lot of really bad things to get you to the point where you are seeing things that are generally safer, but they don't get paid a lot of money. And a lot of them are at the whim and the mercy of some of these tech companies who may just pull the rug from under them. And the tweet that you saw here was somebody basically trying to stand up for them. There's also the example that can happen. We've heard of fake news or deep fakes, and at a talk yesterday, someone unpacked the story of Taylor Swift or Zelensky, or these things and these news stories that come out and just basically try to get you to believe something. But what other things that could happen too? You could have perfectly valid and real stories, but then somebody tries to tell you that it's actually fake. And that's something that's called like the liar's dividend. So what is real? Deception. These are things that are going to be things that you need to think about. Like, it's almost like, did God really say that type of moment? And you just feel like that's happening over and over again. And this is reckless technology in action. What about the next stage? When you think about responsible, people want to now try to do better. They're thinking about, how do you build technology where you're taking a pause, you're thinking things through, you're basically trying to see, am I trying to do the best for the world? It's like you're thinking about justice. And lots of examples around this that I've seen. Sometimes people over-rotate. You've got companies who build things, like I said, safety or align, say, large language models so that they are sort of potentially gelling more with human values. And sometimes you'll see DALL-E and then Gemini most recently might over-rotate as they're thinking about handling bias. And there's been examples that I've seen. For example, I talked about sometimes creatives may have their content sucked up by these large language models to the point where they actually can't make a living. And they've seen some papers like Nightshade, which was created by University of Chicago. And what they're looking at is actually try to poison the data that's actually being used by large language models so that their artwork cannot show up in the search results. And sometimes it can even confuse the large language model. So if you're looking for cat, it might show something else. So if people kind of taking back control of some of these things to just make sure that justice is served. And I've heard a lot of talks at this conference that are also kind of advocating for this. And this is responsible AI. And we're thinking about, you're thinking about things like fairness, you're thinking about things like bias, and there's been a lot of good talks around this. But there's a third way, and here is where we're talking about redemptive technology. Examples, there are many, again, that I've heard at these conferences, but there's things like examples that I've heard of, seen most recently. The Apologist is a FaithTech project, and it's trying to put together, as it builds a large language model, and a way for people to answer questions, thinking about the person behind the question. Empathy is some of the ways that you're building. With Mark Sears and the folks at Sprout Studio Now, they actually had a chance to share about Cloud Factory, and Cloud Factory is, they know more about it, but it was like a really cool thing where they're actually thinking more about the data labelers and making sure that even the folks who are building with their AI solutions are being taken care of. And I put another one in here because I kind of really like it. I saw it at a conference last year, and it's a companion robot for the elderly to just help them in isolation. And what they're trying to do there is they want to make it really, really clear that it is not AI. It doesn't even have a face on it, so you're not even going to mistake it that it's human. And there's a lot of compassion and empathy that goes into building the robot, and it even, things like data privacy. If the elderly person is sick or something's going on, before they even send the information to, say, a doctor, they're going to ask person for permission. And there's a lot of things that are done behind the scenes to make sure that it's safe. So these are like the three different types of building technology. You've got reckless, you've got responsible, and then you've got redemptive. The third one, we want to talk about digging a little deeper into the redemptive technology way. So when you're thinking about redemptive technology and applying the framework, one of the things you want to think about, you want to live by the Spirit. I was talking to a gentleman yesterday, Pele, and he's like, I love a lot of these talks, but I want to see where is the Holy Spirit and God in this. So with the redemptive technology, a lot of it is framed around living by the Spirit. And part of it is like you want to give up power and control. Contrast that with the way the world has been doing a land grab of how do you build these large language models. A lot of the big tech companies and the incumbents who already have access to the data, they already have access to a lot of the compute power and all of the data reach that they've amassed. But giving up power and control is a slightly different way of thinking it. It's a different way of, instead of just saying, I'm going to build things really fast, slow down, think about it, and build in a different way. Relying on the Spirit for guidance in everything that you do, and you want to make sure that you're rooted in that. And we'll talk deeper into how to put that into practice. And then if you find your identity and freedom in Christ, then it just frees you up to build in a way that honors God-ordained identity. You're not trying to prove something, you're basically glorifying God. And some of the values around redemptive framework, when you're applying it, is seeing people as image bearers, and the value and the human dignity is going to basically dictate what you do, how you think about privacy and transparency, because people, you're going to put people first. And this is a hot topic in the AI circles, especially with the thinkers, and they're talking about what does it mean to be human. It's something that I've been learning. Again, when you're designing AI that respects privacy and that promotes fairness, when you look at some of the example that I talked about before, this is what you're going to be zeroing in on. And there are all of these different frameworks, like the trustworthy framework for AI that talks about do no harm, whether it's physical, emotional, financial, etc., and how you build your AI on top of it. But when you're thinking about redemptive technology, you're just basically taking it to another level. And even as you are building some of your AI solutions, you want to look about how you're fostering like the diverse teams, how you're thinking about that particular person. When Stephen talked about each one of his children being different and having to figure out how to work with each one of them, it's the same thing. The whole community and the people you're building with are going to be different, and you want to think about them and how it's going to affect each one of them. And lastly, is one of the things that is in applying the framework, there's also the concept of you want to advance love. Clicker's working. So again, I really like the talk that Mark Sears gave yesterday, and if you didn't have a chance to check it out, he was talking about AI and deepening relationships. So the AI that you build and the systems that you create should deepen these relationships. And if you do this, another way that you can advance love, it's tied to the other one, is you want to prioritize transparency and the accountability in how you develop things. And with tech builders, you just have like higher table stakes when it comes to these things around transparency and accountability. And again, if you're building AI, hopefully you're doing it in such a way, if you have a chance to do so to advance love. You want to make sure that your projects are focusing on how do you point people back to Christ. And sometimes it's not overt, but if you can do it, that's great. And at FaithTech, in the community of tech builders, projects that we tend to work on and build with the community are things that focus on the local church, on the marginalized, or even on evangelism. Because when you're loving God and loving others, that's one of the greatest commandments that Jesus left us. And with tools in the practice, we want to make sure that we continue to promote that. So with that in mind, kind of like thinking about this, let's get a little bit more practical in how you actually do this in community. So we talk about this 4D cycle, which is inspired by the Agile methodology and also by some of the work that went on with Praxis, and Andy Crouch was also instrumental on this. So when you look at each one of these cycles, there are tools and practices that you can put in place to go through it. For example, in the first phase, which is the discover phase, you want to see those affected by Christ, by the problem that you're trying to solve through the lens of Christ. And some of the same things that we talked about, you want to value people as image bearers, and you want to lament and go through this process of like, how is what I'm building going to influence or increase bias? What am I building that's going to like decrease privacy? Am I thinking about the people that are their jobs are going to be displaced? And is what I'm building widening inequalities? And you want to lament and go through this whole process even before you start to build. So you don't want to tack on AI or anything or this whole framework at the end of your build. Just like people in regular software development, when they're thinking about security, don't want to think about security at the end. It's obviously too late, usually by then. You want to make it a part of your whole process. So seeing those affected through Christ, through the lens of Christ, is going to allow you to actually do this. The second stage of the process is going through a discernment process. And when you're going through a discernment process, you're actually seeking God's wisdom. This is where the Holy Spirit is coming in, and as you're walking through it, you want to go through and explore and evaluate the AI solutions through a redemptive lens. And sometimes that means that there are certain things, certain solutions or systems that you're not going to use. If maybe, for example, you say, I'm going to reject that data set because that data set is biased, or that data set contains things that I just don't think I should be using as part of my values. You're also going to look at receiving, maybe instead of building that entirely new chatbot or this new language model, look and see if there's something that's already out there. That could be a way for you to steward your resources well, instead of trying to go in and build something from scratch. There might be an opportunity to reimagine what's already out there. So take some time and go through and see what's out there as well. And in a talk that Eric gave yesterday about open source, he's trying to encourage this collaboration, and this conference is about collaboration, so there could be opportunities to share the work or even make it open source so others can benefit from it. And at the end of the day, there might be a possibility where there's nothing that's out there that you can actually take and reuse, and it's not fitting your needs, and that in a way that you can go in and create something new. So this is the discernment process, and then the next step of the process is basically now you're getting into the development aspects of it, and as you're developing, you're making sure that the Spirit is front and center as how you're developing, keeping in mind all of the different values that you had from the get-go, and you also want to make sure that you're always building and choosing or designing the algorithms or the AI systems, how you're cleaning the data sets, what you're thinking about, who's creating the data sets, are they being fairly compensated? All of these different things should be something that you're thinking about. And if somebody comes to a decision that if they're using your system, are you able to give them an idea of why that decision was made, especially if it's like a large language model? Some things are really hard to do within AI systems, but if we have a higher calling, we challenge you to do that as well. And then the other thing is when you're actually done developing, and this is usually an iterative cycle, at the end of the day, how do you figure out that you actually built something that was meaningful? This could be like an upside down Sermon on the Mount thing where it's not about how much money you made or how fast you went to IPO. It could be the way we think about this, and this echoes again the talk that Mark gave yesterday, is you measure impact through the deepening relationship. And sometimes we think about it like friendship compounded over time. And I had a chance to do this in one of the projects, and how I came to know about FaithTech was through a hackathon where we got to build a project called Sound of Your Love. And through that project and stepping with people for weekly over a 3-year period, I was able to start by just building a project, tech solution, but then it became meeting weekly, praying with each other weekly, and it became a relationship that was more important than the actual product that we built. I'm going to quickly kind of walk through a kind of like a contrived example of going through this, this whole process of like building this talk. So in building this talk, I'm like, let me see what it looks like to kind of use this faith-driven development. And some of these aspects could be applied to any AI product that you're building. And as I was going through this, usually my process is just to go start doing things really fast, and then this time I'm like, okay, what do you want me to talk about, God? I'm like, any day now. The people want a slides. It just became like an exercise and a little bit of anxiety. But as I went through this, I also started with just a lament session. So just like Nehemiah when he was building, going through the wall, and he saw the broken walls, and this is an example. So I wrote a lament for those whose data had been misappropriated by AI technology. And I wrote a lament for those whose lives have been negatively affected by AI decisions that they cannot challenge or do not even see. And I wrote a lament for those who do not see what's coming for them when they use AI-centric products. And then I wrote a lament for those who are terrified of all the bad things they believe AI will bring. I wrote a lament for those who are overly optimistic about all the good things they believe AI will solve, and that sometimes is me. And I wrote a lament for the future Nehemiahs who can help build those broken down walls of Jerusalem we find ourselves in. I wrote a lament for Christians in big tech companies who feel alone in the battle. And I definitely identified with that. And I wrote a lament for AI practitioners and the ecosystem they will influence in the future. And as I was thinking about this, what was my talk going to be about? The next stage in the process is I started to see what is it that I should not talk about, reject, reuse. And when it comes to rejecting, some of the things I'm like, okay, transhumanism, obviously not going to go with that. I'm overly optimistic, probably going to temper that a little bit. And when I looked at receiving, I'm just going to happily consume the things that people have done. There is so much good content out there. When I looked at Reimagine, Gen AI, so many tools out there that can help you actually do the images, as you can see, help you with some of like your thinking, your outlining, your structure. But I wanted to put all of this under the authority of and discernment of God's Spirit. And obviously, the FaithTech Playbook was the underpinning of everything in this talk. I didn't really have to create anything new because a lot of these things, people have already done a lot of this work, and I'm sure that I could just benefit from all the things that they have done. And obviously, as part of like the development phase, there were a lot of podcasts that I could listen to. I love Daniel Whitenack's Partners, Practical AI. I kind of like see that a lot. There's a lot of work, podcasts, articles. I prayed a lot. I procrastinated even more. I attended AI Forum, got jazzed up. There were a lot of spirit downloads that I walked through, and then finally created an abstract and outline, and at the very last moment, I was able to get this thing done under guidance of the Holy Spirit. But this is just an exercise in just this, but there are other ways that you can actually take this and apply this in anything you build, and it's not just AI, but it's just like a kind of a good blueprint. I want to kind of like think about some of the things that I'm really excited about the future of AI, but I'm also not as excited about the future in AI if it isn't redeemed by a community of people like yourselves and practitioners who are led by the Spirit. The purpose statement for FaithTech is to awaken a Jesus revival in and through tech, and AI is a big part of that. So this is something that I am especially passionate about. And in the foreseeable future, we want to see one that promotes AI and then promotes human flourishing and justice and love of God and love of others, and that's when we're going to get to this point. And I invite you to read the FaithTech Playbook if you haven't done so. Potentially, you can find a way to practice it in your development workflow. I highly encourage it. And be a part of the open dialogue that's going on. You've heard this spoken about a couple of times, but join the AI Collective. Continue the conversations that are going to happen after this conference, because things are changing so fast. We'd really love for you to stay engaged. And if you're interested in being part of the FaithTech community, there are about 38 communities around the world. Join one. Just go to faithtech.com. In fact, if you're around this evening, there's a meetup happening right here in Orlando. I don't think it's going to be easy. There are a lot of challenges with what we are doing together here. And the challenges are many, but I am very optimistic, as you've probably heard me say enough times. So as we look in the future, I'm on fire. I'm seeing what's going to happen. I don't think my optimism is displaced because I always believe that in my conversations, God is always in control, and He never has, and He never will give up on redeeming the world. And this is a world that I think can be transformed by AI that's redemptive, and it's waiting for us to go out and do it together, to build it together. So excited to see that happening, and excited to see what we all build. So thank you.